Well, first and foremost, just a little correction in my introduction. I'm not a special guest. I'm your sister in solidarity, and that will always be true. So, but I am honored to also be your Congresswoman and to join you virtually today. Good rising to everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you as we kick off the weekend here and um, do some truth telling. Let's talk frankly about periods because one of the most significant obstacles to menstrual equity is the intentional stigmatization of periods. A period is not a curse, it is not an omen. It is a biological process that, according to Global Citizen, 800 million people experience daily. Yet we speak of menstruation in whispered euphemisms. We pass our secret period products under tables and pretend like it's crass and offensive to menstruate. Cultural misogyny, systemic gaslighting within our medical system have perpetuated violence against people who menstruate. Throughout history, having a uterus has been synonymous with mental illness. Can you believe that? We have trivialized periods for centuries and have socialized our young people, both those who menstruate and those who don't, to believe misconceptions about menstruation and to perpetuate the idea that menstruation is anything but a common physiological function. So, having a dialogue on periods is not just a nice thing to do, it has real health implications. So many women, especially Black women and women of color, are suffering from, including myself, fibroids, endometriosis, and serious uterine conditions because they are not encouraged to talk about their menstruation experiences, even with their care providers. Too many people believe that their excruciating period experiences are normal because we're not talking about periods at all. On top of these health implications, we know the stigmatization and the marginalization of people who have periods also has very real economic implications. The cost of menstrual hygiene products adds up. I can't tell you how many girls have contacted me saying that I can't afford tampons or pads. Can you Venmo me some money? Out of all the many girls that I mentor. Conservative estimates find that a person may spend close to $2,000 on tampons in their lifetime. That cost is much greater if you are not the only person who menstruates in your household. If you use a variety of products and if you need to change your products, which is true for fibroid sufferers, frequently. These are essential purchases. Tampons and pads that are comfortable and ergonomic are not luxury items. We don't expect people to carry toilet paper with them to a public restroom, yet with menstrual products, you're just supposed to have your own. Despite the clear necessity, people are forced to make choices between buying sanitary products or buying other necessities for their families. And these are unjust choices, just unacceptable. Without adequate menstrual hygiene products, menstruating people are left to improvise or free bleed. Now, while some people may make that choice for their own bodies, for many people, that is not an option. And using makeshift sanitary products or using single products for too long can result in dangerous health issues like urinary tract infections or toxic shock syndrome. And menstruation hasn't stopped during the pandemic. Stores were cleared out of tampons and pads, and household budgets only got tighter, making it even more difficult for those most in need to access tampons and pads. The feeling of being without a tampon when you need one is stressful, and it can feel humiliating, and it can feel shameful. And that feeling of shame is only compounded for our trans siblings who often face greater stigmatization when trying to access menstrual hygiene products. And for people experiencing homelessness, those who are unhoused, who don't have reliable access to bathrooms, privacy, or basic hygiene products and services. So that's why I applaud the Massachusetts Menstrual Equity Coalition for successfully advocating for Massachusetts' first period policy, securing $500,000 for menstrual products in shelters, $500,000. Menstrual equity is not just an issue for one community or one demographic. It is an intersectional, intergenerational issue, and it deserves bold, precise legislative action at both the state and the federal level. I'm excited and I'm determined to fight alongside Mass Now to pass the I Am Act through the State House to ensure access to free menstrual products, free of stigma, to all menstruating individuals in all Massachusetts public schools, shelters, and prisons. And I'll take that fight to Washington. Was proud to sign a letter this month in partnership with my sister in service, Congresswoman Grace Ming out of New York, to call on President Biden to affirm menstrual equity as a fundamental health and human right, and to establish a menstrual equity task force under the White House Gender Policy Council. We can make strides to eradicate period poverty, and we must, because no one should be denied basic access to basic health and hygiene needs, and that's on period. We have a powerful conversation ahead of us today, so let me introduce our brilliant panelists. Bria Gadsden is the co-founder of two social impact nonprofit organizations, Love Your Menses Incorporated and Merrimack Valley Black and Brown Voices Incorporated. Bria is currently the executive director, again, of Love Your Menses Incorporated, a global menstrual equity organization. Bria has dedicated her career to promoting menstrual health and supporting the reproductive health needs of women and girls through health education, mentorship, and wellness coaching. Next, we have Treyandre Valentine. They have 10 years of experience in supporting LGBTQ plus survivors of domestic violence, grassroots organizing, community engagement, fundraising, training facilitation, educational programming and development, specializing in anti-oppression and LGBTQ plus inclusion. And we also have Diya Khullar, menstrual equity activist with experience pioneering Northeastern University's free menstrual products program, advocating for Massachusetts I Am bill, and providing period products for incarcerated and unhoused people in New Jersey. Currently, Diya is the program coordinator for Love Your Menses Flow Tech for Girls program, which integrates mobile app technology in menstrual health for Black and Brown youth. Okay, so now let's just get into it. Can you share with me your journey on how you got involved in the issue of menstrual equity? So would love to hear from each of you. Okay, we'll just start with you, Bria.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to meet you, Congresswoman. Thank you for always representing my district, my hometown. We appreciate you. So my name is Bria Gadsden. I was born and raised in Mattapan, and I am a survivor of dysmenorrhea. Every month I suffer from painful periods, and since I was an adolescent, I would have to miss school because the pain was so bad. And the only option my doctor could provide is birth control. But I was not comfortable taking it. And so I had to just suffer through the pain and suffer in silence. And it wasn't until I got to college did I begin having honest conversations about my period and my body with my friends. Actually, one of my friends, she asked me one day, she said, Bria, do you poop a lot on your period? And at first I was like, why is she asking me this question? And then I thought about it and I was like, actually, I do, but why do I? And so I started learning more about the physiology of the menstrual cycle. Why do I experience cramps? Why do I experience bloating and fatigue? And it made me really understand and embrace my flow in a way I never did before. And since then, I've learned how to manage my pain better. I've become more comfortable with my body. And I wanted to offer and hold space for young Black and Brown girls such as myself when I was younger. And so my mentor, who has recently passed away, Irvine Goldson.
I was just gonna, oh my gosh. I was going to bring her into this space. I feel her here. Thank you so much for naming her. Oh my goodness.
Yes, yes. We miss her so much. She was a true girl's girl, advocate for women, girls, boys, everyone in the community. And she was that connector. And so one day I said, Irvine, I want to host a period party in Roxbury for Black and Brown girls. And she said, okay, we'll cover the food and we'll have the space, just market and advertise. And so we hosted our first Love Your Menses event in May 2019 at the Thelma D. Burns building. Over 100 people came out. We had Black OBGYNs from the community lead workshops and talk to girls and parents about reproductive health. And it was really an intergenerational experience. We had grandmas share their period stories and what they weren't taught and how they had to overcome the stigma. And since then, we turned it into a nonprofit organization, and we're doing this work in the community. We do menstrual education workshops, not only in Boston, but we're also overseas in Haiti, Liberia, Gambia, and Nigeria. And we also distribute free period products in the community, and we're installing period dispensers. So if any community organization in Boston wants a dispenser, I go in with my hammer, I put it on the wall, I stock it with period products, because we want to make sure everyone has access to safe products that are free of toxic chemicals that negatively affect our endocrine system.
Wow. Thank you, Bria. Thank you for what is clearly a labor of love. And thank you for sharing your personal story. And I can certainly relate to that. You know, like many Black girls, I menstruated very early, actually at the age of 10. So I felt tremendous shame about that. And I actually got started my Menses, my period, at a slumber party. And so I felt great stigma because I was already a minority in every way from my other peers. You know, I had a different family model, lived in a different neighborhood, was already developing, you know, much more quickly. And so, you know, as Black and brown girls, we are already criminalized just for how we show up in the world, and including in learning communities. And so to have started my Menses early, to have also been struggling with dysmenorrhea. So I lived in the school nurse's office and sometimes had to be hospitalized because I was dehydrated because I would get so sick. And I just remember being in gym class and already feeling self-conscious because my body was built differently. I was one of very few Black girls, and I was having such a heavy flow because of my dysmenorrhea. I just was sure that I thought people could smell me. You know, I just had, you know, all of this self-consciousness. So, you know, I just thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for laboring in love, and thank you for your willingness to have uncomfortable conversations. You know, if we're not willing to make people uncomfortable, we won't make progress. So, and thank you for bringing Irvine into the space. You are truly a manifestation in so many ways of her. So, okay. All right, so next up, so Diya, we would love to hear, you know, if you want to just, what's your journey and how you got involved in menstrual equity work?
Yes, hello. So again, my name is Diya. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I have a few thank yous. I want to thank Sasha, Bria, Gambrell, and Mass now for having me here. And to thank Kalika for your amazing remarks. I really resonated with the statement about things being a relay and not a race, and we don't want to cut corners. And thank you, Congresswoman Pressley, for being here and for moderating the discussion and providing your input. And for introducing the EACH Act recently, actually, if people aren't familiar, we're trying to look to reverse the Hyde Amendment and essentially increase Abortion Act. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So I actually came across a project by Viet Nguyen, who was a student at Brown University while I was an undergrad. And they actually used the student government to provide period products in all restrooms on Brown University's campus: men's restrooms, women's restrooms, and gender neutral restrooms. And when I saw this kind of raised the question in me, why not? Why don't I have this at Northeastern, where I attended undergrad? Why don't we have this everywhere? And as Congresswoman Pressley mentioned earlier, why is toilet paper free? Why are mirrors free, which aren't necessarily essential in the public restrooms, but we don't have any allocation towards period products? So that was kind of my foray into menstrual equity. And then a professor named Cheryl Menlinger at my college, Northeastern, actually introduced me to the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research, who has a biennial conference. And once I attended there, Professor Chris Vogel of UMass Amherst did an amazing keynote presentation talking about the stigmatization of periods, as Congresswoman Pressley mentioned earlier as well, and how if we continue to have this stigma, then providing products is kind of like trying to plug a hole, but not really stopping the leak at its source. So we really want to combat that stigma. And it's very difficult to get policy passed if the stigma is persisting. And so that's kind of what I learned was the root of the issue. And since then, I've participated in various projects with Mass Now and Sasha, as well as in New Jersey, to kind of try learning more about our community's needs, whether this is students in school or incarcerated people or people experiencing homelessness. And now with the Massachusetts Menstrual Equity Coalition, we are working on a survey to examine how the pandemic has affected this in particular for our 3 populations for the IM bill, which are people experiencing homelessness, public school children grades 6 through 12, and people experiencing incarceration. I do want to point out that especially in some of our prisons, we have heard anecdotes of even if the products are provided for free, they're being sold at the commissary. Or perhaps trigger warning for sexual assault. There are guards that are maybe forcing inmates to perform sexual favors for these products. And so we just want to investigate that further and try our best to really stop these sort of activities and truly increase people's access to period care and menstrual health management.
Both of you are such an inspiration, and just, your compassion, your thoughtfulness, your fluency, of these issues, and in your approach. Just when you speak, you are doing the work of destigmatization. And so I thank you for taking up space and creating space for others to follow suit, and to love their Menses and to do the work of liberation, and to include menstrual equity in that. This is something that we have to name. So, thank you for that. And so speaking of naming the issue and then doing the work, I agree, Bria, amazing job, Diya. Also, I love all the shine theory on here, each person is celebrating, the person before them. So that's beautiful. But, let's just talk about, language, and let's talk about, how we're, the need to be more inclusive and intentional in the language that we use in movement building and how we advocate around this issue. And, just the fact that you're both women of color already is disruptive, because we know like feminist policy and activism spaces have historically been dominated by white cis women. So how do we really usher in an area both of inclusive language in our advocacy, an era of intergenerational, intersectional feminist activism? You might find it hard to answer the question because you all just do it innately. You're like, I just show up, Congresswoman. I just show up. That's how we do it. But if you can, try to extrapolate and give us some insight.
That's a great question. I believe in the power of storytelling. I've learned so much about language and menstrual equity from Diya sharing her story, from my co-founder, Dr. Bria sharing her menstrual story. And so I am a true believer in when people have the opportunity to share their stories, we learn so much about each other. Although menstruation is universal, we're all different in our own way, and we all have a unique menstrual experience. And so, for example, we have menstrual cups here, and we do work overseas. And so one day I was talking to one of our leaders, Yasa, and I said, hey, what if we ship some menstrual cups to Liberia? Would they use it? And she's like, Bria, they don't know what that is. We can't just go and tell them what to use. We have to first provide education and what menstrual cups are and what's the benefits of them. But before we can do that, we have to meet them where they're at. We have to give them an opportunity to share their menstrual stories and their experiences and have them identify themselves and how they choose to show up. in this space. And so I think that's so powerful. And I think oftentimes, we can, just think we know what's best for people, but people know what's best for people. For so long, even the father of modern gynecology experimenting on enslaved women against their will and without anesthesia. For so long, I feel like Black women, you know, people have, took control over our bodies, and our bodies have not been our own. And so one thing we do is really empower young people, older people, whoever, that your body is your own, and you know your body better than your doctor, your friend, your family member. And so we really promote body sovereignty, and how, regardless of how people choose to identify themselves, how they choose to show up, we support them. If you bleed, we support you. And so I think that's super important, is to really have people share their stories and meet them where they're at, and give them an opportunity to show up in this space. And so I've learned so much from Diya. Even when we started doing our programming, we would use the term girls and young women, and Diya challenged us to be more inclusive and be mindful of the language that we're using, because not everyone who menstruates identifies as female. And so, I've learned so much. And I think sometimes people think that, they know it all, but every day I'm learning something new. And every day we can raise our consciousness and become better people in this movement. And it's really a relay. Diya's passing the baton to me, and I'm passing it to someone else. And that's the only way we're truly going to destigmatize menstruation in our communities, is if we pass the baton and support each other, and not judge each other, and criticize each other, but really learn from one another. And so I'm just so thankful for the people that I've met in this space, who are challenging me every day to raise my consciousness and be more inclusive, and welcome everyone to this space, and have them show up as they choose to be. And if you bleed, even if you don't bleed, you still need to be a part of this movement. And I think that's so important.
Excellent. Thank you, Bria. For someone who seemed for a moment there concerned about how you might tackle that question, you did an incredible job. Diya, can you speak to that? Just again, how in many ways it is disruptive that you, as women of color, showing up in spaces when usually feminist and activist spaces are dominated not by us. So how do we ensure that the movement is one that is intersectional and that is inclusive, both in the verbiage we use, but also in how we mobilize and how we organize and advocate?
Right, so thank you so much, Bria. I actually want to expand a bit on Bria's comment about no single one of us knows everything. And so we always have to look at who is getting neglected the most, who is getting marginalized the most by this process. And I actually wrote a few things down so that I don't omit anything I didn't want to talk about. But I've noticed personally in the menstrual equity space, first of all, a lot of campaigns are gendered, and that reinforces the gender binary, and again excludes non-binary and transgender people, or which I wish Trey Andre was here to speak about that, because I don't identify as transgender, but in this case, I would like to highlight the issue. And even when non-binary and transgender people are included in any sort of menstrual equity campaigns, a lot of times it seems like an afterthought. And so that's something I definitely would like to see change. And the first way we can do that is by highlighting trans and non-binary menstrual activists themselves, and positioning them in positions of power where they can speak for themselves and advocate. And then another population of people who I feel like are always neglected in the conversation, or almost always, is people with disabilities. And I recently spoke with someone on the phone who was talking about a tampon applicator for people with disabilities, which is in its beginning phases because the person was told that the market is too small. But this applicator can help so many different people with spinal injuries, or even people with obesity, people who are transgender who want to create a disconnect between that body part and the tampon. And even if it just helps a few people, that doesn't mean that we don't do it, right? But this is something I never hear about, and I don't really know how people with different sorts of disabilities manage their periods. So again, I think the way to solve that is to have people with disabilities speak on this themselves. And for other organizations with more power, such as organizations led by cisgendered white women, to highlight these people and bring their voices to a much wider audience. And then menstruation-related conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, fibroids, decidual casts, these are not spoken about enough, and that's why a lot of people don't even know where to begin with management. The last thing I wanted to quickly mention is that a friend of mine who's transgender just told me what a decidual cast is, which for people who don't know, it's when your period kind of comes out all at once. So the entire tissue of your uterus just comes out in one piece. It's very painful, and it actually can look like the shape of your uterus. And this has happened to a lot of people who take the hormone testosterone and come off it, or even people who take certain birth control and come off it. And they don't have any way to prevent it, and there's not nearly enough research. So those are just a few of the ways we can expand the movement. And I think, again, I can't say it enough, we just need to amplify people's voices who are marginalized.
I mean, I have a member of my A team on this, participating in this, Shanae, and I hope she's taking copious notes, but also putting both your names in highlight, because I want to invite you to testify before Congress. We're going to find what that opportunity is, because, you know, and we'll get Trey Andre too, if we can, but you all are just extraordinary, and you are teaching with such conviction, but also grace. I think it's important when you're trying to grow a movement, you know, that, you know, you don't make people feel ashamed about their shame, you know, about, you know, so, you know what I'm saying? So just thank you just for how you're moving in this space. And each of you spoke to a mantra that I seek to practice, and that is that the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. You know, I've said that, you know, throughout certainly my congressional run, and now in Congress, and that wasn't a slogan, that is a practice. We'll always better understand the nuances of an issue and the complexity of it if we're led by those that are closest to it. So it is just a reminder to continue to be intentional. No one is voiceless, but there are many people that are unheard. And so being intentional about hearing as many voices as possible strengthens the movement, strengthens our advocacy, and certainly makes the policies that we advance much smarter and much more effective. So thank you all for speaking to that very eloquently. Okay, so the final question is, what do we need to center in our conversations about menstrual equity? So I think Diya, you just hit on some of this. So we'll start with Bria, and then you can pick it up on the back end, Diya. But, you know, share some of the nuances that it's important that we not lose sight of.
A great question. I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that this is an intergenerational conversation. I think sometimes we forget about our elders, you know, after they go through menopause, it's like, that's it. They don't need any reproductive health education. They don't need any sexual health education. When 60 and 70-year-olds, they may be having sex as well. We need to continue having them be a part of this conversation. And I think, especially in my community, there's a lot of grandparents raising their grandchildren. And so if they were never taught about menstruation, or if it was stigmatized when they were younger, how do we expect them to support their grandchildren or their nieces, right? And so I think it's important to not forget about them, to include them in this conversation. They have so much wisdom and so much value to add to the conversation. And it's important to hear about their menstrual experiences and to help them learn some things that they may not have learned when they were younger. For example, I love my elders. I was raised by my grandparents and my great grandparents, and to this day, I talk to them about my vagina. I noticed I was graying down there a little, and I got scared because I'm only 26, and my doctor said, well, have you asked your mom or your grandmother if they experienced graying down there? And that was never a conversation I thought about having. And so now I talk to my grandmother and my great grandmother about my reproductive health, and I asked them, did you experience period pain or fibroids? And they did. And so from learning about their experience, that has helped me understand my reproductive health. And I think sometimes we can forget about our elders in this conversation, and we need to bring them and highlight their experiences because they have so much to share. So I think it's important to keep this as intergenerational as possible, as well as keep this youth-centered. And so a lot of these reproductive health conditions that we experience when we're older may be prevented if we provide the education and the support and the reproductive health care while they're young. There's a lot of doctors who I've spoken to who said they've performed myomectomies on 17 and 18-year-olds, removing their fibroids. And that's really young. And I think a lot of our young people don't know when to seek help. They don't know what's normal and abnormal. They think period pain is normal, and it's not. And it's not something to just say, oh, well, just take an Aleve or ibuprofen and you'll be fine. And then years and years go by. They may see a doctor and they may get misdiagnosed. And in reality, it could be endometriosis because, as we know, it takes years and years and multiple doctor's visits before you get properly diagnosed with endo. And so I think we need to support our younger generation, make sure that they have the reproductive health care that they need, regardless if they have insurance or not. Boston, we do have many health centers and hospitals, but we have to also support those who may not have health insurance. We can't just assume because we live in a progressive state with all these great healthcare facilities that everyone has access to reproductive health care that's equitable, because it's not. And so I think it's important to be mindful of that, as well as I think we need to work with our medical providers. So I love my co-founder, Dr. Azuma, because she's learned so much about how to be a better doctor from watching me turn down birth control. She's like, Bria, why don't you just take it? Like, here it is. I'm like, no, like solve the root cause. Like, what is going on? Why am I experiencing this period pain? Don't just put a Band-Aid over this wound and just think everything's going to be fine. Like, work with me. Do I need to change my diet? Do I need to be more physically active? Is it my stress levels? What is causing this pain or this abnormality? And so a few weeks ago, she cried when we were speaking, and she said, Bria, I've learned so much about how to be a better doctor from watching you advocate for your reproductive health. And that was just so powerful to me. I think there needs to be more unison with our medical providers, with public health officials, with legislators. We all need to get on the same page if we're really going to promote menstrual equity. A lot of people think menstrual equity is just access to period products, but it's access to menstrual education. We need to do more education in our schools, in our communities, working with parents, youth workers. We need to make sure people do have access to products and reproductive health care. And that's the only way we're really going to promote menstrual equity, eliminate period poverty, and make our communities more period positive.
I mean, so much wisdom, which belies your chronological ages. And I would say, you know, since I am 47 and getting closer to midlife, that I am chuckling a little bit at your saying, I'm sure there might even be some 60-year-olds that are still sexually active. Yes, Bria, there are 60-year-olds that is like not even old, Bria. But but I
think about my grandparents having sex.
I got you. But I also wanted to say that I so appreciate the intergenerational point you made. One of the things that I'm proudest of is when I was on the Boston City Council for 8 years, I created this new standing policy committee. It still exists. It's changed shape a little bit. But within the work of that Committee on Healthy Women, Families, and Communities, one of the first things I did was work with those closest to the issue and advocates and educators to develop this comprehensive sex and health education curriculum that was age appropriate, culturally competent, included sexuality. And it took us a while, but it was ultimately permanently adopted as a part of the Boston Public Schools wellness curriculum, even though we're still struggling on implementation, but the policy is sound and it is there. And I remember how many grand families, that's what we call those family models, where grandparents are the primary provider and caregiver, just said, thank you, because I never spoke about these issues. But I'm raising my grandchildren and I need support. And this is giving me some foundational tools. So I love what you offered there, just about the need to be intergenerational, the wisdom that exists there, what you need to learn about your family's medical history. Again, conversations that rarely happen, even when prompted, because folks are often disconnected from their own experience, So I appreciate that point very much. And there was something else. I mean, all of it resonated, but oh yes, and considering, because the whole question was about what are the nuances and things we need to center that we might leave out. So your point was intergenerational education, and also your point about those who don't have access to healthcare. Like, just don't make assumptions just because of our progressive bona fides. There are a lot of still, systemic barriers there. And, all of this is really about self-agency, self-determination. And that does begin with that bodily, autonomy and alignment. And the last thing I want to say to your point about your healthcare provider saying that you've been a teacher, to her, the other reason why we need to speak with our elders is that I can't tell you how many, as someone who lives with fibroids and has had 2 myomectomies, that when I started to have more conversations about holistic health from elders, that I was able to shrink my fibroids. When for the longest time, I thought that my only recourse was something invasive. That's just not true. So there are also holistic things that we can be pursuing. So, okay, Diya, what are your thoughts about nuances and things that we need to center in this work that we might have blind spots to and not consider?
So in addition to working at Love Your Menses with Bria, I also work at a nonprofit called Creative Reaction Lab based out of St. Louis. And something we have been learning about is how white supremacy influences our processes for so many different things, including activism. And I've observed this myself as well, in terms of there being a huge focus on statistics, numbers, metrics, rather than stigma, or even having those non-grandiose conversations with your friends and family members. And I think when organizations focus on highlighting how many period products they've provided or how many people they've helped, this is something that does keep the cisgendered, white women-led organizations in power, because they tend to have the most resources. And so I think if we take a shift away from a focus on numbers to stigma and policy, that can create a more lasting change. And on sustainability, Bria already mentioned menstrual health education, which can empower people. Once they learn themselves, they can teach their friends and family for free, and that can create a cascading effect. And I even have a friend named Sekajolo Matthew, who is working in a town in Uganda called Mityana, and he is teaching his students how to make their own reusable pads. So they will know exactly how to sew their reusable pads, reusable underwear for periods, and they won't need him after that. They can teach their friends, their sisters, their mothers, siblings, anyone. And so I think focusing on sustainable solutions, and also looking at what people in other places are doing, other countries maybe, is important, because people love to deny that the US has an issue with period poverty or menstrual taboo, but we really do. And people need to stop believing in this misconception that the global South is behind us and we need to help them, because honestly, we need to solve our own issues first, and there's a lot to be learned from other people. So I think focusing on sustainability and shifting the focus away from numbers. There's something else I noticed, the nonprofit activist industrial complex, which is more of a social media sort of thing, where young people will kind of focus on themselves or center themselves in the work, and again, bring that focus back to statistics. And I think if we can dismantle that or combat that by highlighting each other, fellow organizations, making it collaboration or bringing it back to collaboration instead of competition, that is the best way to bring this work forward without excluding people.
I love that. And I love that you, reminded us of that broader framework and just how entrenched and how we can be complicit in perpetuating white supremacy without even knowing it. And so, that this can't be, that these systems have to be named and actively dismantled as well. So I just appreciate that very much. Again, so much wisdom here, very instructive, very prescriptive. And in order for us to, I do believe, to replace systems of oppression with liberation and to replace trauma with healing, that transformative change can only come about centering the humanity of people. And that is why storytelling is so important, and it's an important contextual reminder that when we default to statistics, that we are perpetuating white supremacy. So thank you. Thank you so much. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you, or at least all that I'm allowed to ask you today. It was wonderful sharing this virtual table with you. I learned a lot. I know this is going to be enlightening for so many people, and I hope that it will also embolden them not only to join this movement, but to begin that self-awareness and advocacy just with themselves, in their own bodies. So thank you all so very much, and thank you to Mass Now and all our partners, and thank you, DJ Wysham. DJ Wysham is always so generous in giving of their gifts to efforts like this. So appreciate you so very much, and loving all the new music. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you all so very much. Okay, am I turning it over to somebody?
Yes, it will be me, Bria Squared.
Okay, yes, we love that. We love that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Congresswoman Pressley. Thank you so much to our entire panel. And we are so sorry Trey Andre could not be here, but thank you to them as well. And Diya and Bria. And I love saying that together because it rhymes.
Yeah.
But we are so grateful to have shared this space with you all. And I'm sure everyone can see in the chat, there's so much feminist community happening here. Like, we're asking questions, we're answering questions for each other's. We know that holistic practices are great. And now I'm like ready to go downstairs and ask my grandma, like, help me, So thank you all so much. I'm gonna share this space with my co-director, Sasha, if you wanna join me for our closing remarks. I see her. There she is.
There she is. Hi, Sasha.
Hello, Congresswoman Pressley.
Yeah, this is so good to see you.
I know. Likewise, virtually.
Yeah.
We've been working together, obviously, for many, many years.
Yes.
I just found your endorsement papers from 2011.
Wow.
In the office.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And so
it's wonderful to be on this journey with you and to do this work, and just appreciate everyone so much. This has been so restorative, and I'm leaving here so clear-eyed and so full. And as I said, I'm more than your Congresswoman. I am your sister in solidarity. So I hope that you will not hesitate to give me a call when and if ever you need me, as a resource, as a partner, as an advocate. Okay? It's my honor. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you,
And
thank you. Yeah.
I want to say thank you to the board too, because you know what? A lot of these boards are in name only. That is not true for the Mass Now board. So I do want to thank this board for their active engagement in all that they do. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I know everyone right now on this is fangirling so hard, right? Because we see you, Congresswoman Pressley, on the TV speaking truth to power, and we're like, wow, she just says it, and we relate because we talk about this all the time ourselves. But it's just so exciting, I think, to build this power and this confidence together, because we are in this together, from Massachusetts to DC to California to Indiana and Ohio, and Triana from Georgia now. We see you and we are supporting you and the infringements on voting rights happening right now in Georgia. It is all of our fights together. And so the energy is just like palpable virtually. This is exciting. Yesterday, right, we had our ERA launch, and we're talking about how period policies, feminist policy, the Equal Rights Amendment, getting constitutional equity. This is all of the work that we're doing. And it's not just about the law. This is about our lived experiences. And as Kamala Lopez said on our launch yesterday, this is literally about saving the planet. What our feminist democracy is at stake. And so I just want to thank you all for being in this movement work together. It's not easy, but we're doing it together. And so with that movement work, we want to be moving together to bring our weekend into motion. So DJ Ysham.